What if your deepest weakness is your need to be understood? You crave it, someone to hear you, to get you. But Machiavelli would laugh. Because while you're busy justifying your pain, explaining your motives, the powerful stay silent. They know this truth. To explain is to kneel. To be understood is to be owned. When a lion roars, it doesn't explain why. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon, he didn't write a blog post. He acted and let the silence thunder. The need to be understood is not connection. It's a disguised addiction to validation, to control, to safety. And in the eyes of power, it's weakness dressed as vulnerability. In this video, you'll learn why killing this need is your first step to emotional dominance. No more begging to be seen. No more handing people your power. Stay until the end. Because by then, you'll never look at silence the same way again. 1. The curse of needing to be seen. You think if they just understood you, they'd finally respect you. That if you opened your heart a little more, softened your voice, and explained yourself clearly enough, someone would finally see you. But Machiavelli would laugh at this delusion. Because every time you beg to be understood, you're not being seen, you're being sized up. You hand over your narrative like a confession, expecting compassion. What you receive instead is quiet judgment, categorization, weakness exposed and noted. The more you explain yourself, the more you cheapen yourself. When you speak to be validated, you lose. Because now you've entered someone else's frame. You're no longer the author of your story. You're a character pleading with the reader. You're no longer the sculptor of perception. You're clay in their hands. That moment of vulnerability you hoped would win them over, it made you predictable. And anything predictable can be controlled. Ever wonder why people don't take your side even after you've poured out your soul? It's not that they didn't hear you, it's that they measured you. We are not as empathetic a species as we pretend. When you open up in desperation, the world doesn't see a deeper you. It sees a weaker one that needs to be comforted, one that can't stand alone, one that can be played. Machiavelli's world wasn't made for the explainers. It was built by the silent, the feared, the ones who speak not to connect, but to command. Power doesn't beg for understanding. It creates the terms of engagement. It doesn't justify, it moves. That's the hard truth most will never swallow. Because silence feels lonely. It feels like rejection. But that's only because we were raised to confuse approval with connection. Here's the paradox. When you stop explaining, people start respecting. When you stop trying to be seen, they become curious. When you become a mystery, you stop being a pawn. Silence creates tension, and tension is power. Think of a door slowly closing. The more it creaks shut without explanation, the more attention it commands. That's you, when you say less and mean more. This doesn't mean emotion is weakness. It means emotional exposure without control is. You must master the art of selective revelation. You can feel deeply, but never hand those feelings over like bargaining chips. Speak only when you intend to shape, not to be saved. Because the moment you try to be understood, you allow the other person to define what you mean. What if the goal isn't to be understood, but to be unreachable in your depth? To become a force so internally secure that misunderstanding doesn't shake you, it shields you? The lion doesn't explain its roar. The storm doesn't apologize for the thunder, and neither should you. So next time you're tempted to defend yourself, remember, your silence isn't a lack of expression, it's a weapon. Let others scramble to decode your silence while you move quietly with intent. Because those who are hard to read are harder to control. And in a world that survives on manipulation, that is power. 2. Silence is strategy, not absence. Power doesn't speak. It waits. It watches. It calculates. In war, silence is camouflage. And in life, it's one of the most underrated forms of control. The moment you speak, you start revealing coordinates. Coordinates to your fears, your insecurities, your desires. People don't just listen to your words. They study them. They trace every sentence like a map, hunting for leverage. That joke you made to fit in. That small complaint you whispered when you thought no one noticed. Each one, a breadcrumb. And when someone wants to control you, they don't fight you head on. They just collect your breadcrumbs and wait. He who knows how to be silent will soon know how to speak powerfully. Nietzsche understood this paradox. True power doesn't feel the need to fill silence. It uses it as a weapon. Because silence isn't emptiness, it's pressure. It makes the other side squirm. They begin to project, to overthink, to reveal their hands first. And in a world obsessed with shouting, restraint becomes a rare and disorienting advantage. Most people are reactive. You push them, they explain. You provoke them, they justify. But when you refuse to react, when your silence becomes unnerving, you become the one in control. The cobra doesn't hiss unless it's forced to. Its stillness is the threat. That image should burn into your mind, because power that remains silent is felt, not seen. It's not about repressing your voice. It's about choosing when it actually matters. You don't need to correct every misconception. You don't need to respond to every slight. You don't need to clarify your intentions to anyone who doubts them. Every time you do, you shrink. You reinforce the illusion that their opinion deserves your energy. Restraint doesn't make you passive. It makes you unreadable. And unreadable people are unbreakable. You become a question that haunts people long after you've left the room. Silence is the space where mystique is born. And mystique, real mystique, isn't performance. It's discipline. It's resisting the cheap impulse to explain your soul to those who never earned the right to understand it. You think your honesty will set you free. But in a world driven by power, it often just makes you vulnerable. Consider this. If someone knew every thought you had, every trigger, every wound, could they respect you? Or would they use you? The truth is, most people aren't ready for your full self. And more dangerously, many don't even want it. They want pieces they can control. So when you choose silence, you're not hiding. You're protecting. You're not disconnected. You're deliberate. Your silence becomes an invisible shield, one that filters manipulation before it even reaches your skin. Let them wonder what you're thinking. Let them strain to interpret your calm. Let them fill the gaps with their own projections. Because while they do, you are free. Free from being defined. Free from being caged. And that freedom, rooted in intentional silence, is the beginning of untouchable power. Speak only when silence no longer serves you. Until then, stay still like the cobra. 3. Machiavelli's law of misinterpretation. Let them misunderstand you. Let them build myths, assumptions, and projections in their own minds. That confusion? It's not a weakness. It's your shield. Machiavelli didn't seek to be understood. He sought to be feared, respected, and obeyed. Not because people knew his heart, but because they didn't. His power grew in the shadows of misinterpretation. When they can't read you, they hesitate. And hesitation is leverage. Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand. Everyone sees what you appear to be. That single line dismantles the modern obsession with being authentic at all costs. Machiavelli knew that perception is reality, and more importantly, it's yours to design. You don't need people to know who you are. You need them to wonder. Because once they believe they understand you, they no longer fear you. They've put you in a box. They've made you smaller than you are, predictable, safe, forgotten. But when you let misinterpretation linger, you create fog. And within that fog, you operate with freedom. You're not confined to their expectations. You're not trapped in an identity built for their comfort. You become fluid, a shapeshifter, a strategist. The moment you stop chasing clarity in others' minds, you begin to craft something far more powerful: mystique. And mystique, once born, is hard to kill. Why does mystery always attract? Because the human mind cannot resist the urge to fill in blanks. Silence provokes imagination more than truth ever could. The less you say, the more they project. The less you reveal, the more they obsess. They assign meaning where there is none. They draw conclusions from glances, pauses, gestures. And in their attempts to decode you, they expose themselves. That's the secret. Misinterpretation isn't a failure of communication. It's a tactic. When they're busy interpreting your silence, they're revealing their insecurities, their desires, their fears. You remain still. They start unraveling. Power isn't about being right. It's about being unreachable. Machiavelli's greatest insight was that men don't care for truth. They care for comfort. And if you're always explaining, always clarifying, always chasing their comfort, then you're no longer a threat. You're entertainment. True leaders are never fully known. Their presence is felt, but never defined. They move through rooms like storms with no center, calm on the surface, chaotic underneath. That's what confuses people. That's what draws them in. Not your transparency, but your opacity. So stop wasting time trying to be seen for who you really are. Even if they saw you clearly, they wouldn't understand. And even if they understood, they might still reject you. Why? Because truth doesn't bind people. Illusion does. The more unpredictable you become, the more control you gain. So speak in layers. Move in misdirection. Let them doubt you. Let them wonder. Let them invent a version of you they can't confirm or kill. Because in that version lives your advantage. In that version, you own the narrative. And sometimes, the strongest voice in the room is the one no one can define. 4. Emotional control begins with detachment. The need to be understood is not noble. It's emotional dependency dressed as vulnerability. It's the silent plea to be accepted, not as you are, but as you hope to be perceived. That urge to correct, to explain, to clarify your intentions isn't power. It's weakness disguised as sincerity. When you constantly need to be understood, you hand the emotional reins to others. You're saying, "Please validate the reality I live in, or I'll collapse." And that is the beginning of your psychological captivity. One must become hard, like a diamond, to endure oneself. Nietzsche wasn't advocating for numbness. He was calling for detachment, a separation from the need to be mirrored by others. The strongest man is not the one who screams the loudest or shares the most. It's the one who can contain his chaos without leaking. When you stop chasing external clarity, you start building internal control. You start choosing who deserves your truth and when. That choice, that gatekeeping, is the foundation of emotional power. Try this. Next time someone misreads you, don't correct them. Don't defend yourself. Just observe. Watch their confusion turn into respect. Watch how your silence unsettles them more than your explanation ever could. People aren't used to someone who doesn't flinch when misunderstood. It forces them to reconsider, to wonder, to recalibrate. And that shift in dynamic, where they reach and you withhold, is where control begins. You owe no one your insides, not because your emotions are invalid, but because they are sacred. And sacred things aren't handed out like candy. They are earned through presence, through energy, through aligned intent. Most people seek understanding not for depth, but for reassurance. They don't want to understand you. They want to reduce you to something they can manage. But when you detach from that, when you stop depending on their ability to get you, you become untouchable. Containment isn't repression. It's precision. It's knowing that your energy has weight, and not everyone deserves to carry it. You can still feel everything: rage, love, sorrow. But you don't owe anyone the performance of those feelings. They are yours to sit with, sharpen, and use. When you stop bleeding emotionally for every person who doesn't understand you, you begin to lead yourself. You stop asking, "Why don't they see me?" And you start asking, "Why do I need them to?" Detachment is not about coldness. It's about sovereignty. It's when your inner world becomes so fortified that even misunderstanding can't rattle you. And from that stillness, you gain a weapon most will never possess: emotional choice. The choice to respond or remain silent. The choice to reveal or withhold. The choice to lead without pleading. That is the art Machiavelli mastered: to move the world without needing its approval. When you detach from the need to be understood, you don't lose connection. You find freedom. And with that freedom, your emotions stop owning you and start serving you. 5. The myth of vulnerability as strength. You've been fed a myth that vulnerability is always strength, that exposing your soul, your fears, your traumas is somehow empowering. That if someone sees you fully and completely, something inside you will finally heal. But here's the darker truth. Being seen does not equal being safe. In fact, being seen often becomes the very path to being weakened. Vulnerability is not neutral. It's not universally respected. It's not always held gently. In the wrong hands, it's a blueprint for your destruction. What you reveal can and will be used against you. That's not paranoia. That's a Machiavellian principle. People may nod when you open up. They may smile. They may even cry. But the moment they feel threatened by you or need leverage, they'll reach back for what you revealed. Your wounds become weapons, not because you were wrong to feel them, but because you trusted the wrong audience with your insides. Power doesn't give the world ammunition and expect mercy in return. Not all wounds deserve air. Some need armor. Some pain isn't meant to be narrated. It's meant to be transmuted in silence. Not every scar needs to be explained to be validated. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is carry it quietly, without turning your identity into a spectacle of suffering. Your mystery is your moat. It's the distance between what people think they know and what they'll never access. It keeps opportunists out. It keeps your essence intact. Like Narcissus, you drown when you obsess over your own reflection, especially when it's mirrored through others' eyes. That desperate need to be understood, to be validated emotionally, turns your power into a performance. You curate your pain so others can clap for it. But they're not clapping for your healing. They're clapping because your openness makes them feel superior, safer, stronger. That's not healing. That's subtle self-destruction. True strength is not in being seen. It's in being unchangeable, whether seen or not. It's in knowing who you are so deeply that misunderstanding doesn't move you. that silence doesn't isolate you, that invisibility doesn't diminish you. Vulnerability is a tool, but tools can cut both ways. And when used without discernment, they open doors you may never be able to close again. Stop assuming everyone deserves your backstory. Your history is not public property. Your pain is not a shared resource. The more sacred your experience, the more selective you must be. Machiavelli would remind you, the ruler who opens every gate to appear relatable is not loved more. They are respected less. The mystique of strength is built in what is not shown. The depth no one gets to touch. The shadow you never explain. There's power in being unknown, in smiling while withholding, in bleeding but not broadcasting. You are not obligated to make your vulnerability someone else's comfort. Keep your core armored, not out of fear, but because not every soul is worthy of what you carry. Let them wonder what haunts you. Let them guess where your strength comes from. The less they know, the less they can break. 6. Your narrative is not for sale. The moment you start explaining yourself, you're no longer the author. You've become a negotiator. You're now co-writing your story with people who haven't lived a single chapter of it. Every time you clarify your choices, justify your silence, or decode your behavior, you hand over creative control. You say, "Here, edit me." But your life, your truth, was never meant to be public property. Let them write their version. Let them guess, assume, distort. It changes nothing unless you give them the pen. The truth is only dangerous when it's shared too freely. Alan Watts hinted at something Machiavelli lived by. Truth loses power the more accessible it becomes. If everyone knows your script, they know where to strike. They know where the pain is buried, where the confidence is brittle, where your need to be understood will betray you. The wise don't advertise their core, they guard it. Because truth in the wrong hands becomes narrative warfare. Your silence isn't secrecy, it's strategy. Power is quiet because it doesn't beg to be seen. It doesn't scream its origin. It doesn't hold up a sign that says, "Please understand me." That's noise. That's vulnerability in disguise. Real power exists behind locked doors. Doors most people don't even know exist. You become untouchable not by shouting who you are, but by becoming unreachable in your self-definition. You know. And that's enough. The masses confuse noise for significance. But if your identity needs to be constantly explained, it was never stable to begin with. The deeper your truth, the less it needs exposure. The stronger your character, the less it needs applause. Your narrative is not a product for consumption. It's not for sale. It's a sacred architecture, built in solitude, tested in silence. And only those with keys of earned trust should be allowed past the gate. The next time someone misunderstands you, resist the urge to fix it. Let them sit with their assumptions. Let them write their little fiction. If they're truly perceptive, they'll sense the gap between what they think and what is. If they're not, they were never meant to understand you anyway. There is strength in leaving someone puzzled. There is leverage in being misread. Because once people believe they fully understand you, they stop respecting your complexity. You become an open book, and open books are skimmed, not studied. Guard your narrative like a fortress. You don't need to lie, you just need to withhold. Not out of fear, but out of command. When people don't know your full story, they're forced to approach you with caution. Curiosity replaces assumption. Imagination replaces certainty. And in that space of uncertainty, you own the room. So what happens when you stop explaining altogether? People stop controlling your story, and they start chasing your meaning. 7. Being misunderstood is a superpower. Being misunderstood isn't a flaw. It's a frequency few are tuned to hear. The masses will always squint at those who don't fit their frame. And the moment you break their pattern, they label you arrogant, cold, distant, fake. But that label is a gift, because it means you've stopped performing. You've left the stage of people-pleasing and stepped into the shadows of real presence. The ones who are feared, who are followed, who change the structure of things. They were all misunderstood long before they were admired. Leaders, prophets, revolutionaries. They didn't beg to be seen. They accepted the loneliness of being different. And in that isolation, they became unstoppable. The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe, Jung once said. The tribe wants you predictable, comfortable, understandable. Because when you're understandable, you're manageable. But when you defy the narrative, when you operate in silence, when your motives don't fit their logic, you become a threat. Misunderstanding, then, is not rejection. It's mystique. And mystique is the birth of power. It makes people curious. It makes them cautious. It makes them respect what they don't fully grasp. Let the world misread you. Let them think you're cold when you're focused. Let them call you arrogant when you're detached. Let them call you fake when you're selective with your truth. The more they misunderstand, the more you know you've exited the frame they want to trap you in. You're no longer living to be relatable. You're living to be real. And reality, when it's authentic, is always uncomfortable for those who've built their lives around illusion. The next time someone looks at you with narrowed eyes and says, "I don't get you," smile. That means you've stopped rehearsing your personality for their comfort. That means you're finally moving in silence, not for approval, but for effect. And the effect? They notice, even if they can't explain why. They begin to pause before they speak to you. They question what you're thinking. They sense there's more behind your calm than you let on. And in that ambiguity, your influence grows. You weren't made to be obvious. You weren't made to be easily read. Your depth isn't a paragraph. It's a locked journal in a language few can translate. And that's not loneliness. That's sovereignty. Because when people can't define you, they can't confine you. Your identity no longer belongs to their expectations. It belongs to you. Entirely. Without apology. Without dilution. So stop seeking to be understood. That craving will drown you in mediocrity. Be misunderstood. Be feared. Be respected in your silence. The world will either catch up or fall away. But either way, you won't need to explain. Because you'll know. Those who truly matter will feel your power without needing to understand it. And that is the mark of someone who no longer performs, but simply is. 8. Dominate through inner clarity. You don't need the world to understand you. You need to understand yourself. The real war isn't out there. It's in the fog of your own perception. Most people seek clarity in mirrors that were never built for them. They explain themselves not because they're certain, but because they're lost. They think if enough people validate their truth, it must be real. But truth doesn't need applause. It only needs recognition. And that recognition starts in the quietest room, your own mind. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Carl Jung didn't write that as poetry. He wrote it as a warning. Because if you don't know what drives you, what wounds you carry, what patterns own you, you will keep reaching for people to tell you who you are. You'll cling to interpretations as identity. You'll confuse attention for validation. And in doing so, you'll slowly give away the one thing no one should ever own: your self-perception. Inner clarity is the final gate of power. When you know who you are, you don't need to perform yourself. You don't need to defend, convince, or decode. You simply move, and everything else adjusts, like the lion. It doesn't wait for the jungle to understand it. It doesn't ask for reassurance before it roars. It doesn't explain why it walks with authority. It moves. And in that movement, the entire environment responds. The clearer you are inside, the quieter you become outside. Because certainty doesn't broadcast, it radiates. You no longer react to every misjudgment, every rumor, every sideways glance. You see it all for what it is: noise. And you don't argue with noise. You rise above it. Inner clarity gives you that altitude. It removes the need to be understood, not because you've given up, but because you've grown past it. When you stop trying to be seen, you start becoming something worth watching. You stop being a mirror for others' comfort and start being a force that shapes your own world. Clarity becomes your armor. You don't bend to opinions. You observe them like clouds passing through a fixed sky. You are no longer a product of misinterpretation. You become the architect of deliberate misunderstanding. Because the more people guess, the less they can control. Here's the truth. Not everyone deserves a front row seat to your evolution. Not everyone has earned access to your clarity. And once you possess it, the desire to be understood feels small. You begin to realize that mastery has nothing to prove. That depth has no need to echo. And that power, the rarest kind, is the kind that never asks to be known. So stop reaching. Go inward. Strip away the noise, face the chaos, and carve out a self so unshakable, so precise, that even if no one ever understands you again, you're still immovable. Because once you dominate your inner world, the outer world falls in line. You were taught to explain, to soften yourself to be understood. But what if the highest form of self-respect is silence? Machiavelli didn't write for the masses. He wrote for the minds that dare to rule. Nietzsche didn't care if you agreed. And Jung knew that most people don't even understand themselves. So stop waiting. Be misunderstood. Be feared. Be clear only to yourself. Because power begins where performance ends. If this hit something deep, don't just watch. Transformation subscribe to Mindrift. Share this with someone who talks too much and listens too little. And remember, the moment you stop needing to be understood, you start becoming unstoppable.